saw Ricardo join the Zoom or the Teams.
Yeah. So
Oh, yeah. The Teams.
All right, so we are now live and running. So I'll go ahead and share the agenda. All right. Welcome everybody to the Salem Public Art Commission's subcommittee meeting for Thursday, January 29th, 2026. It's a little after 10:30, it's 10:32. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. We have, let's see, you want me to just do a roll call?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
All right. As far as I know, board members are Suzanne Nopak,
Yeah, here.
Chris Darcy,
Here.
Vice Chair, and Carl Roth.
Here.
And then staff members, I have Aaron Kimsey from Public Works.
Present.
Yeah. Jake Morris from Historic Planning. Present. And Lisa Anderson Ogilvy, also from Planning. And then Aaron, would you introduce your guests?
Are they here? I don't see anything else on, unless I'm not seeing them.
Okay.
This is Gretchen.
Oh, hey.
From CB2.
Okay.
Cody probably is trying to get on via Teams.
Okay. I just sent him an email letting him know that it was Zoom. Same as Ricardo. But we probably could get started.
Here we go. We got Cody and Ricardo coming on.
Sorry.
Chris, do you want me as the chair to call the meeting to order or do anything, or you want to just run the meeting and Aaron, you kind of sort of your meeting? Do you want to just handle it? Or
Sure.
am I?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you want me to start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Take it away.
All right.
Just everybody really quick. I'm gonna be joining from my laptop also, just FYI, I'm not at the office. That way I can actually see what's happening better.
Great. All right, I'll just go ahead and dive in. For I think everyone probably is on the same page now. At least maybe not. I don't know if Olivia's up to speed. I'm sorry, Lisa's up to speed, but we have we have a bond improvement project at Civic, and as part of the improvement, we are required to spend 0.5% on public art, and so which amounts to about $140,000. The city's been working with SPAC pretty closely the last few weeks and months to put together an RFQ that we plan on getting out. Actually, we had hoped to get it out this week, and then we ran into not an issue, well, I guess sort of an issue, but we after talking with our historic partners of the city, we realized we needed to potentially make some modifications. And so so the RFQ is pretty much ready to go with the exception of making some of these changes. So I had a conversation with our historic team, and they mentioned that because of the historic designation of Civic, there could potentially be some issues with the selected art locations. So SPAC toured the building last few months, and they had identified. Let me pull it up. Sorry, I'm not more prepared. I was running from meeting to meeting this morning. So All right, can you guys see that?
Yes.
So these SPAC had selected 2 locations for art as part of this project. The first one was the vertical walls of the elevator towers, and the second location was this kind of stage platform within the atrium. And after speaking with Kimberly, there was some reservations about using the vertical elevator towers as a location for art, given the historic nature of the building. I brought in Cody and Gretchen from CB2 in on this meeting to provide a little bit of background, and just they've worked really closely with code and planning as part of other elements of the project to make sure we were following the historic guidelines. And so I thought they could potentially provide some additional context for what areas are considered part of the historic designation, and how we dealt with, like, for example, the atrium skylights in this space. We had to follow some certain criteria, as well as the exterior of the building. And I think one of the questions that I had that I was hoping they could help me with is what part of the building is considered interior, what part is considered exterior, because the whole campus, even though it's exposed to the environment, if you will, as far as air conditions, it is covered, and it's all considered the building. And so Cody, you sent me a quick email, but you might be able to add some clarity to that. But I think that's an important thing for us to just be all on the same page to understand what those, where those guidelines are and how they are incorporated. That's a good segue for you maybe to chime in on what you've learned or seen from previous conversations.
Yeah. Just going back through the nomination verbiage, the atrium is considered a courtyard, and it's considered a character defining space of the Salem Civic Center. And so it does appear to kind of fall within those same kind of guidelines of modifying and character defining elements, such as the concrete columns and concrete elements. And so I guess the question, it'd be kind of opening up to Kimberly and Jake and others, just to understand the interpretation of the elevator shafts as kind of those contributing, columnar concrete material pieces or not. I guess that's maybe the first question.
So for those, we're looking at 2 different things. They are part of the character defining features of it, because when you don't have all the ornamentation that you would have on like a traditional building, they're using the material and the form to express the design of the building, and so we see that in the National Register nomination. For those vertical elements, we have the original historic material. So one thing that we would look at very closely is how much, if there is art on there and it's affixed, how intensive does that fixture need to be? It would have to be something that was a minimal impact of the historic material. So if there are bolts or screws that go in there, how deeply are they going in there? How many holes is it creating? That sort of thing. How extensive would that impact be? And then the second thing would be, overall, what would the visual impact be? So it need to be something that was consistent with the overall building. So it would have to be, for something like that on the side like that, it would have to be consistent with the scale and the general shape of those. We didn't rule out putting something up there, but it something that was more like banners or flat materials would be a lot more consistent with the type of fixtures that wouldn't damage those columns versus something if it was cantilevered out farther, the farther out it is, the more extensive the fixtures would need to be. So those are the type of things we'd look at for those vertical elevator shafts, the part where you can see.
Yeah, hearing that the concrete, especially like concrete, the material is really the important part there, and maintaining it as much as you can. But it sounds like you're still open to fixing as long as there's, some review of that.
Right. What it would need to be, the process would be that they would need the artist would have to propose something that was consistent with the design guidelines. So they'd have to demonstrate that it was, a minimal physical impact of that historic material, and then the visual impact's reasonable and doesn't overpower the overall design. Or it's a pretty large area, so you could have something somewhat significant without, overpowering the overall experience of that, courtyard.
Yeah. It's interesting to note too, in the nomination at the end of the courtyard section, it's pointed out that it's important to note that Salem has a robust and active arts commission. And so there's actually discussion of donated art pieces and art pieces in the courtyard itself, and contributing to that character defining nature of the space. So that's an interesting part of the nomination too for discussion, I think.
Can you elaborate on that, Cody?
Yeah, the quote in the nomination, I can just read it. It says, "It is important to note that Salem has a robust and active arts commission. While donated art pieces from the period of significance, like Untitled by Wilson B. Blix, are important to retain, it is more about using art in the space to create community that should be considered character defining." So I think there's kind of there's both things at play here.
So can there be language inserted into the RFQ that indicates all the points that were made earlier, that whatever is there needs to have a light touch on the existing materials, needs to conform to the massing and the overall historical nature of the building? Is that a possibility to move this?
I thought that's what we were here this morning to actually do.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think what I was hoping to get out of this is I think there's a few options we can go with. What I heard from Jake and Kimberly earlier this week is staff wouldn't recommend well, let me back up. I guess the vertical towers for an art location is feasible, but there are some guidelines that would need to be followed on the material and the type and the attachment. So one option is we do away with that location altogether and we just focus on location 2 that's highlighted here on this presentation. If that's not desirable and we still want to potentially move forward with location 1, and maybe we renumber those, so one's primary and one's secondary, then we would need to add whatever processes and quote unquote restrictions essentially that would give the artists some understanding of what type of art can be and cannot be adhered to the towers, because we might, some artists might read those, interpret those items and say, oh, well, I'm not going to submit because I can't, that's not the type of art that I do. And so we would essentially weed out some of that stuff. What I want to get away from is getting 40 proposals and then 20 right off the bat are, they proposed on location 1 and we can't hire them because they're not going to be able to meet.
I think those are good points. I think it's important to point out from this rendering that the intention of the Public Art Commission was to solicit proposals for only the vertical elements. So doing away with those horizontal bands that make this look like an H. It's intended that there would be two sites for a combined work of art that would relate to the structure. So I just think that I just want to make that clear. I thought the points that Jake just made were very instructive. If I were an artist reading this call, it would be clear to me that the structure of the Civic Center is very important. The exposed concrete is very important. Anything that would be proposed for the site would have to have a very light touch in terms of attachment. You know, these are things that are very helpful to an artist. And the person, I never assumed that this would be a high relief, heavy type of thing. But when Jake mentioned banners, I don't think we're talking about something that would be that lightweight either. But I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I wish we had had it a couple months ago.
Right.
Because I understand the importance of this building to Salem and to Oregon. So we want to be, we definitely have that in mind. What else? What else did the landmarks folks suggest?
My understanding is that that anything that goes onto onto that concrete structure there would have to go to Historic Landmarks Commission for review and approval.
And would it be possible for a representative of that group or the commission to be part of our review panel, selection panel?
Yeah, I think that would be
As we go through that, it just seems like that would make sense all the way around.
Yeah.
And
I'm not hearing anything different really than what I was assuming that we were going to be looking for in terms of art. I would not rule out some kind of a banner type or I talked about some kind of synthetic fiber type works or something like that. I think at least what I had in mind was exactly what was mentioned, something with a light touch that that wouldn't impose on the architecture and the material of. So I'm really relieved that we're not. I don't think any of us, from what I'm hearing, would want to rule out this site. And that I think what Carl suggested is that we add the language that would give artists a framework to say whether to say whether their work would fit in something like that or not. So I'm kind of relieved. I thought we were going to hear, can't do it at all. So I don't think it's a problem to be able to qualify it that way. Aaron, I don't know if you need the language for that. If
well,
Chris
yeah.
has been providing a lot of language, and again, I was suggesting to use the word twin in terms of those towers because we don't want something just for one tower. We want it for both and to work together with that as one site.
Yeah, I've gotten some language from Jake and Kimberly, and maybe Jake, can you elaborate? I felt like what I heard on Monday was only certain materials would be allowed, like glass. And I thought there was another material. Certainly banners has been mentioned already, but I mean, metal was discouraged or flat out was not an option. And I don't know.
I think there were a few things there. There's we touched on the keeping the integrity of the building materials themselves, the historic materials, so like having a removable. Also, we wouldn't want to have paint or a permanent finish placed on that directly because then it wouldn't be removable in the future. There should be a rationale for the materials as compatible with the building. And that's something that during the historic design review process that can be justified on what would be a compatible material, especially if someone from historic landmarks is working with you on that, they would have an idea of compatible materials in the context of historic design review. And and that's for the vertical elements. For the square, it would be similar. It would be, you wouldn't want to be painting the existing historic materials, and maybe the base, if it's, statuary or something, we would want to see, compatible base. But then within the say it was statuary itself, that's kind of what I was envisioning in my mind. It would be something that was like an overall scale, which would be consistent with what we usually approve in other parts of the city where they're historic, which would be roughly like, up to 16 foot in height and about 7 by 7, something with that general massing, so that it wouldn't overpower it, but it wouldn't be so modest that it wasn't something that would be noticeable and substantial enough to be enjoyable. So we have kind of broad brush strokes for the overall design, and then more specific when it comes to any permanent alterations to the building itself. Those are kind of our two things we weigh with these type of projects. Is that helpful?
Could we be more specific about compatible material? I mean, that sounds pretty subjective.
I was thinking the same thing. What does that mean?
So there's kind of two things you do. You don't want to make something that looks so compatible that it's confused with the building itself,
Right.
So if you put something in there that was the exact same material, people would be tricked into saying, just an example, like, oh, there are gargoyles on there now. But if the material was an exact match, someone may think that this was actually part of the design, like it had an ornamentation. So there want to be some differentiation. But if the material is so out of scale, there's some discretion in terms of what that would look like, because it speaks with the overall design. Some types of metal may work, other types may not. It depends on what the visual impact is, what the scale of it is, what the overall impact is. So there's for those that since it's so much design involved, it isn't as much of these are your exact list, because they may be used in an unconventional way or as a minor detail. So it wouldn't rule out certain materials, but it would just be a matter of the overall impact of that. Are these materials differentiated yet compatible? Mm-hmm. I wish I could give more detail in that, but when you're doing new design, it's hard you wouldn't want to rule out use of the material unless it was something that specifically would never have anything to do with the property.
So Jake, this is Gretchen. Can you do you know what level of review this would be processed as? And I guess related, typically we would have to have a fully designed package when we're submitting for that, including how it would be attached to the structure.
Right.
And so trying to just understand what the review process would probably be helpful for the group as well.
Sure. Before I forget, one thing we'd look at is, like, instead of actively having something that was self-lit, it would be like passive lighting. And then we'd look at like if there was conduit to feed the light. So you wanted a light wash over something, you'd want those to be kind of a little bit subtle. In terms of historic design review, depending on how substantial it is and how large it is, if it's a major review, then it would be seen in front of the Historic Landmarks Commission, where it would be presented there, and then they would make a determination, and that would be either they might say, this fits all our criteria, we're completely confident in that, and then they wouldn't have any conditions. In other cases, they may say, well, the scale's a little this way, or maybe this one aspect does something that they feel impacts the historic character, and then they might issue a condition. It's as if this is altered a little bit, then we might be all right with it. Or if it was something that was like out of the pale, they would deny it. But So those are kind of their three options that they would do. If it's something that is less, you know, visual impact, and this property is a little different than some of them because a lot of our design review is based on, you know, what is the main facade, but this property is more plazas and courtyards and things. And so we don't really have that to lean on as much. So we have a little bit of flexibility in some cases that it could be a class 2 minor, which would be an administrative decision. But also when something has such public impact, sometimes it's good to do you know, a major historic design review, because then there is the, you know, it's in front of the public in that way.
Yeah, and I'll just add, oh, sorry, Gretchen, that there was conversation about having a commissioner on the review, but if it needs to go to the commission as a land use application, it wouldn't really be appropriate for them to be on the selection committee for the art. If they wanted to do that, they would need to recuse themselves from reviewing the application. They can't do both. Even if it's staff review, if there's an appeal, it would go to the Historic Landmarks Commission. So I talked to our legal staff about that, but it's probably not appropriate for them to be on the review committee. But if it's helpful, historic staff could, you know, provide input on submissions around, you know, how they're proposing to attach it and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like they wouldn't necessarily be like a scoring member where they're actually selecting. They would just be more of an advisory to make sure that the rest of us are understanding what the impacts are and how that might be. And the
Historic Landmarks Commission is not intended to substitute their opinion on the quality of the art or you know, anything like that. I know the art wells downtown for the statues that went to the Historic Landmarks Commission, and that review wasn't about what art was going to go in which location, but it was about what does the base look like, how is that impacting the right of way in the historic district, what's the material of the base, and then those were approved, you know, as a group, and then the art commission got to decide what art was being placed on those bases. This is maybe a little different, you know, if it was a banner, then it would be like, well, what's the material of the banner and how they're attaching it, and they wouldn't even look at what's on the banner. I think if it's going to be, you know, glass art or metal art or something, then they would more on the material, but again, not necessarily the artistic quality. That's not, you know, we would steer them away from that. It's not our intent that they would be substituting their opinion for the art commission's opinion on that.
Sounds like there's some type of like guidelines for what material would determine the different classes for review, different level of review.
Not really the materials. It's really scale and impact. There would be materials on like a traditional building if you're doing a window for a window, but for art, we don't necessarily.
Right. For this,
different.
For this, we wouldn't want to impact, you know, content too much. But what we would want to do is say, you know, for posterity, you know, is this a removable, you know, removable thing, and is the scale overall compatible? Or say, just for instance, say someone proposed something that was self-lighted and it had a lot of lumens and it was very bright. Even though that would be part of the design per se, it wouldn't necessarily, it would be so overpowering that we'd say the overall amount of light. And so they would look at criteria like, okay, so if you wanted it to be lighted, it would be an indirect light, something like that. But they wouldn't say, oh, that's a design that I don't feel is a good design. It would be a matter of, look, that's so bright that it's overpowering the overall character of the property inside there. So that's the type of arguments I'd want to see from a commissioner, versus I like this design versus I like this other design. It would be, say there was a kind of traditional statuary in there, and it's, you know, one of them's 30 feet tall. Then it would be a matter of, okay, that's a lot, that could potentially be a lot of weight. What does that mean for the base and what it would need to be? And then does that start to impact the overall character? Whereas instead of an accent or a moderate focal point, it's become an overpowering thing where you lose the overall character of that space. So that's the type of arguments that would be appropriate in the context of their review.
I would hope that as early in the process as possible, we could have that kind of input, you know, similar to what's happening today. We had put a lot of thought and effort into these locations. And I think if we would have known some of the thoughts of the commission and of the Historic Preservation Commission and others who are involved in that, we would have maybe thought differently about other locations. It would be really unfortunate if we went through the review process and we selected art that we were really excited about and then found out, oh, you can't do that. And then it's a lot of spinning of wheels and a waste of our time, frankly. So it would be really helpful if as early in the process someone could be very involved in reviewing the applications with us so that we could say, okay, well, we're going to have to rule that one out completely. We might like it, but we don't think it's going to pass muster based on the advice that we're getting and the input we're getting. So, you know, I understand the restrictions of, you know, someone having to recuse themselves or whatever, if it's, but someone who's really knowledgeable about what the commission might approve and might not approve would be really helpful as early on in the process as possible.
One thing as staff that we can do is, you know, when a project like this is done, we have staff recommendations, and so we say, you know, whatever's presented, we say we feel this based on the criteria, this is consistent with the criteria, or if it's not, we suggest reasons why we think it's not. It's not inappropriate for staff to help with those type of things in terms of what staff, it would not be appropriate to do is say, oh, this is a good design and this is a bad design. But if you have a set of designs and one is like, say for instance, the scale is very, very large, like just overpoweringly large, you know, staff could say, well, that may not be one that we could recommend based on those reasons, and it would be hard for it to fit the criteria, you know, and then we could tell you what criteria those are, you know, and so that gives you something, you know, to either justify that, oh, if this criteria is a concern, I need to have a very strong argument that I want Historic Landmarks Commission to say because staff thinks that the criteria is interpreted this way. So that's something that you know, staff is happy to help with, as long as we're not saying one is a good design and one's a bad design. But I'm happy to share concerns with how it may fit criteria, you know, if you have a set of designs that you're looking at.
Well, and it would be maybe helpful then if the RFP listed some of those besides we talked about, you know, light material and how it's connected, but Kimberly is recommending, and maybe Jake as well, you know, an overall height limitation on the statue. So I don't know how the committee would feel about that, but putting in a, you know, maximum height so we wouldn't get something that you automatically have to maybe dismiss due to that.
Provide a little more guideline.
I think it already says that, doesn't it, Aaron? Isn't it 7 foot?
For the sculpture, we didn't detail any dimensions. We just said it needs to be like scalable to the size of the atrium, like it needs to fit in. But we can certainly, if there's like black and white criteria that we need to follow, like dimensional sizing, that's easy to do. We can incorporate that. That way everyone's on the same page. I get a little nervous when there's like this kind of like criteria that we kind of think we know, but we don't really know. So just so everyone kind of understands the process, this RFQ is going to go to all, you know, everyone in the world that wants to submit on art, and it's strictly an RFQ. So we're going to get proposals from artists that say, here's my qualifications. I do a lot of public art. These are examples of some of the art that I do around the, you know, wherever. And it could be sculptural art, it could be banner art, it could be, you know, we pretty much say we're going to look at all two and 3 dimensional art as an option. So we're not going to get any actual proposals on what the art will look like. It's just going to be, hey, I'm a great artist and here's why. And then we're going to select from all the proposals. We're going to say, okay, we really like this artist's work and like this artist, and it could be a variety, honestly, of different types, maybe. And then so we would select maybe 6, 8, 10 artists from that pool, and then we would say, okay, artists, here's some money, here's $700, go put together what you like. Actually, now you're going to propose on art. So go out and put together a piece of art that you want to propose for these locations or this location. And then we would have an interview. They would present a mock-up of their art, and then we would select based on that. So we're already they're already in design. They've spent money and time and effort. And then so at that point, if someone is putting together a piece that's not going to fly, we kind of, I mean, we're not too late because we can just say, sorry, you're out. But we want to be able to give them as much as we know so that they're not proposing on something that's not going to be acceptable, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And this is maybe it's a subjective question, but it's more a question of, is one location less restrictive than the other in terms of what historic preservation is looking at? Because that might help inform the Arts Commission folks also.
Right, just because of the way to affix something to a vertical surface, you're going to have to work against gravity versus something that is set on a flat surface. There'd be an inherent larger impact to the material itself if to make sure that stays there. So that would be a limiting factor on any of the vertical elements if you chose those, to put something on a wall, for instance.
So
Okay,
I'm sorry, can I ask a question? Sorry, I'm Daniel Childs. I just came late. I apologize. Go ahead, Gretchen. I thought I interrupted you. I was going to ask a follow-up, but it sounded like you were
well, just kind of related to that, I guess, is the restrictiveness of the materials used, does it apply to both locations or only to the vertical locations?
For the horizontal, like for the base, we want the base to be what we'd consider a compatible material, so something that was like concrete or sort of thing. But the statuary, we're statuary because that's kind of what you generally see. We'd look at the overall scale of it, so like I think the precedent we have in general for something like in a space this large would be something like, I think 16 foot tall, and then maybe roughly 7 by 7 is kind of.
Where is that precedent? Sorry, what is that based on?
That's based on, in some of the parks and other areas where there's a historic consideration. That was kind of the overall scale that was.
And but this building's pretty unique, right? That's why it's on the historic preservation list. And so applying maybe other historic considerations to this specific one feels a little like it's a little bit generalist. If we're very focused on this, no?
Kimberly was wondering, and she apologizes for not being here. She's on a field trip with 75 elementary school kids doing an archaeology dig today. But there was, I think, previously conversation about a third location or different location for a statue outside customer service. And it seems like that one dropped off, and she thought that was maybe from a historic standpoint, or Jake could speak to it, a better location. I guess from a non-historic standpoint, location 2 is a very popular place to get married, especially in the Hispanic Latino community. There's a lot of weddings that take place there. And so we were just wondering, Kimberly and I yesterday when we were talking, what location was picked over maybe one by the customer service center.
I think that was the team's decision based on their understanding of how the art process goes.
Oh yeah, I'll let SPAC speak to that. They were the team that ultimately selected these 2 locations as preferred.
We did have a list of concerns and criteria for what we were considering, and a big part of it was the impact, the overall impact in relation to the brutalist architecture, which is an artwork in itself. And rather to have something small in a more remote location, we thought just to, because of the grandness also of the atrium and the proximity where you could see it from a lot of different angles, whether you came in from the library side, whether you came in from the parking lot side, that it would be central to the building and would really complement the building and work with it, rather than just kind of postage stamp something somewhere. So that's why we chose this location. The platform seemed like a natural that something could go there, right, very central to the atrium. And then just the vertical towers just seemed to be a really prominent feature that could somehow be enhanced. I don't know if I'm saying that right, Carl, and Chris, please chime in if there's any other thoughts that you want to add, or if I said anything incorrect.
Yeah, I think you said that really well. And,
Yep.
Essentially we were looking at, this is such a defining characteristic of the space, this really great lit courtyard area, and putting the art in those two places that we recommended seemed like it celebrated the space rather than kind of, drawing attention just to the art. It seemed to be of a piece with the entire building.
And maybe a little bit more it parallels something we did at the library too, I think, right? The library had that similar kind of moment that is sort
Yes.
of setting in a larger open space of the brutalist architecture, but not taking away from it. I guess I was late, and maybe you guys talked about this right before this. Can you just back up real quick and tell me, or maybe state why the section 23020, that's the historic design review section. Section 2, which is the 2300020, section 2 says that any design, and then C, where am I? There we are. Historic design review. It's not jumping to it. Oh, there it is. Okay. So section C, so it says work conducted entirely within the interior of a local historic resource or contributing or non-contributing building in a local historic resource, which has no effect on exterior architectural features, is exempt from historic design review. So I'm really confused as to why this is the interior of the atrium is not visible from anywhere from outside of the building. The streets, the plaza, the mirror pond, and I mean, effectively from a code standpoint, like we're treating this entire building as a building, like that you actually are in the building when you're in the atrium space. It's code required to be, and maybe you guys talked about this already. I'm just a little get confused as to why the historic review board has to review interior artwork.
The reason for that is because since it's an open atrium and it is a non-conditioned space, there are doors closing the exterior from the interior, that this is a exterior space. Now, I wouldn't consider it a primary facade, even though it's prominent. So the criteria that you would have for a primary facade doesn't apply, but it is an exterior space for these purposes because it's an open air space that you can walk into, and you can, like in this image, you can see the outside through the open air in that image right there. So from the exterior, I feel that you could probably see inside as well.
So because even though it's in the building, because you could see it from outside, like you could see the whole interior of the building from outside because there's windows, right? I mean, I'm a little bit perplexed, I guess, because it's, and also like you're saying that the purview is the attachments, but not the content. So you're allowed to say how you attach it, but you can't say what the art is, but then it's so those defining what it is you're reviewing, because it's not an addition, it's not a building element. It's actually not it's defined definitely not as a building, right? So we're not saying we're adding a building to this. We're not saying we're modifying the structure. We're actually not touching any of the building. We're just placing it there. And at the end of the day, they could go and unscrew the thing and take it off. Like if if they decide one day that this is not what they want, it's not a historic piece. It's completely separate. It doesn't look like anything in the building. And you unscrew it from the wall and you bring it somewhere else for some reason, right? So I'm I don't know. I think the big thing that I'm hearing and the thing I'm kind of struggling with is like how we can move forward with any sort of certainty that what we're doing is going to be able to be done without really like a subjective review by the historic land use. I know you're saying that it's like that it's going to be a criteria based, but you don't have criteria that says art can do this or art should be this tall or art should be this wide. It's very much you saying like applying historic building requirements to an art piece, which is dramatically different from like function and form and goals. And so I sound a little frustrated or flustered because I if you would help us or help me understand the criteria so we can describe this to the SPAC commission, like exactly which section and exactly which code and exactly which criteria you're going to be applying to it, that may be the most helpful. Otherwise, or maybe just see this as what we're saying is like inside of the building, which would then leave it out of your jurisdiction or out of your purview because it is, in fact, a really clear way in the code that you can do that.
Okay, so there's two kinds of paths in terms of criteria. Since this is this is actually a National Register Historic District. So the entire property is a historic district, and within those, there are certain features that are designated as contributing structures and non-contributing ones. Like this building here is a contributing structure. So as you get closer to there's less flexibility for alteration versus non-contributing elements like the library had more of that because it had been more altered. So it was considered a non-contributing building. But that said, you can either use the standards, which would be 230060, because it's public, so that would be your category versus public versus say or commercial or residential. And then you could use that, or if you feel that you need more design leeway or something doesn't quite fit, which sometimes happens with like features such as landscape features or things that aren't as cut and dried or don't appear on every single property, then you could use the general guidelines. Yep, and those have more flexibility there, and then you just demonstrate how it meets those.
And what section are you saying that's in?
So there's 230060, because this is contributing. And then, or we have our general guidelines, which is, let me find those. So 230065.
So you're reviewing this new construction or as standards for historic contributing buildings in public historic districts and individually listed public historic resources. So that's the standards. That's section 060, so 23060, saying the standards for historic modification to historic contributing buildings in public districts and individually listed public resources shall comply with this section. And so it talks about masonry, it talks about windows, it talks about doors, porches, roofs and cornices, solar panels, missing features. So it would be section H, alterations and additions.
you could, if you feel it fits that, you could use that, or you could use the general guidelines.
Decks,
Those give you more.
lintels, architraves, sills. So, but we're not touching the building. We're just saying that we want to put a piece of art on the building, right? So does that mean, so would you judge the art based on how it's attached to the project, and the scale and the size would, and the materials would not be in your purview?
What would be in the purview is there is some language about compatible materials, but the main thing we are looking at as a primary is what does it do to the historic material of the building itself, right? So that's number one, because that's not something you can reverse. And then after that, you have the historic character, right? So there's the historic materials, but there's also the experience of being in there. That's one of the elements of historic integrity. And so for that, we'd look at like overall scale, right? Is that compatible? Say, for instance, in this case, where we see, there's a prominent staircase that is, it's you can tell it's a prominent design feature because it's in the middle and there's vegetation around it and accents, right? And so if a piece of statuary right next to it was, say, it went 3/4 of the way up, for example, to the skylights, well, then it would start to overpower. And so we say with the scale, what does that do to the overall character of that property? And then we look at the specific criteria that is designed for language, that is all of that language designed to capture those concepts.
Can you point me to the language that says that? I'm not seeing that in this section that you pointed at. So I see site features. Maybe it's just item R, site features, replacement or alteration of site features. So we're not replacing anything. We're adding a new site or a new feature in the building, which is not on the site, it's in the building.
Okay, so if you don't feel that there's a good fit in there, what we can do is look at the general guidelines for historic contributing resources. And the first one, let me pull it here, sorry.
So in lieu of standards for historic contributing buildings, may make a proposal for preservation or rehabilitation, which shall confirm. So we're not proposing for preservation, restoration, or rehab. It's just a piece of art. So property should use for historic purpose. So we're doing that.
Right, you're not doing a change of purpose. Now, B, historic materials, finishes, and distinctive features shall be preserved and repaired according to historic preservation methods. So that would capture where we're talking about what your affixment was. Distinctive stylistic features or examples of skilled craftsmanship shall be treated with sensitivity. So if there's a stylistic feature, like is the overall experience of that, and then say something was way out of scale, then you're not treating that sensitively. So in this, you would use that criteria to demonstrate how this overall art piece is consistent with that.
I mean, I could make the argument that brutalism is over the top, and the whole idea of actually putting a small minuscule thing in this space is going to be out of character with this space, because this whole space is composed of giant big concrete beams and columns, and actually putting something small would make it way weirder than a full thing that looks like it's of the style. I mean, is that a case that you would be interested in hearing? I just, because I think it's about wanting to make sure we're not all just like gonna send it to you and you're like, oh well, this doesn't seem right, so I don't want to do this one. And I know, and it's really hard with this language, the way that you just described it. It's like distinctive stylistic features or examples of skilled craftsmanship, significance shall be treated with sensitivity. We're not touching the walls. We're gonna put something into the walls, and that'll hold the art. But like, how do you judge whether what you put into the walls and hold the art is actually going to align with a sensitivity to craft? It's just like, I'm genuinely love to know like an answer.
Okay, so what I would suggest, if you're talking about brush strokes, there is in the National Park Service, which they do all of the review for everything from all the historic preservation tax credits to all the national park historic sites. They are the Minister of Historic Preservation United States. What they have is Secretary of the Interior standards. And so if you look at those, a good example of how they interpret those would be to look at what they do for their tax credit projects. And for that, they have good design guidelines. For this building would be considered rehabilitation because there's alterations being done to it in this overall project. And so there you can kind of see how they interpret those different questions you were asking there. That's the overall general philosophy in historic preservation. That's where you would go for that. Certified local governments generally design their design guidelines to be somewhat consistent with that, but also tailored to each individual, communities' wants and needs, as long as they're consistent. So the type of determinations, how they interpret those type of things, there's a great website from the National Park Service called, if you look there, it's preservation by topic, and they look at that sort of thing. You can look up any of your topics. And so it'd be like, okay, I need to affix something to a wall. What is too extensive? They will have some examples there. If you're looking for broad brush strokes, that would be the way to do that.
Yeah, I hear you. I think one of the biggest I've looked at a lot of those requirements, and one of the funny things even in this code is how it has a lot of focus on historic buildings are historically like brick and mortar, and they have a lot of lintels and details and friezes and like a lot of articulation of like little bits and bobs, and which is the craft and things that they're speaking to, and and when you apply it to this project, it's like a completely different type of craft, right? It's like concrete formwork, and so like some of that language actually doesn't even make sense here, even though like I hear what the intention is. I am curious about this item here on your code on 065 that item E says that changes that have taken place to a historic resource over the course of time are evidence of the history and development of a historic resource and its environment and should be recognized and respected. These changes these changes may have acquired historic significance in their own right, and this significance should be recognized and respected. And I just feel so like heartburn that like history stops now and that we can't add a art piece and continue the historic like nature of this building to support the life and like culture of Salem as a thriving city. And so it just feels like we're fighting you guys about putting a piece of art about how it's getting attacked. We're not fighting. We're discussing this kind of like this code that does not tell us what we can and can't do, except for what you're saying, like we should look at these little things here and there. When I think I see a clear way that's just, you know what, we don't actually need to look at this because it's inside the building, and we could make a really clear case that that's true.
I don't really have discretion to interpret that as an interior space. But
I can. I'm an architect. I've worked with this. I'm a project architect on this building. This building is designated as a one building, the entire thing from all the way from the front edge of the parking garage to the south edge of the building on the underneath the cover. Like we have to describe every individual route from this building to the exit to make sure it's safe. If you're under this canopy, you are in this building 100% without any caveats. So you are inside the building as long as you're in the perimeter of this building, which aligns very nicely with seeing the building from the outside, as you're talking about, is important for this historic relevance, right? So as the project architect on this project, working with the city and the jurisdiction, they see this as the interior of the building, even though even though there's areas that you can feel cold air, like that's inside the building because you have to use the building egress system to leave this space. So if it's not your discretion, it's my discretion. And
No.
I'm saying that this is the inside of the building.
So there can obviously be differences between what building code and fire code require versus what a zoning code or historic preservation code look at. You know, there's differences in occupancy and zoning and use. Like we don't defer to the building code and the fire code to interpret the historic preservation standards. So I mean, you can
Then
feel
I
that
just
way,
need to
but
see, in this space, in your zoning code, then you need to show me where this applies as inside the building. We've showed you all the view. This section is not even in our land use elevations. Like, we don't have this in our land use application for historic review. Like, this interior atrium space is not even part of the purview of your land use review historic application. It's
well, it is
all the
'cause
exterior work.
you changed the atrium, and that's part of what was reviewed and approved, the actual atrium, right?
The top, yeah,
Wow.
but not the exterior of the, that's because of how it impacts the building from the exterior.
Well,
You're
Daniel,
not
I want to
standing
say you did
inside.
miss the beginning, and we did not come here to say that art cannot be placed in these locations. We came here to provide some information that it sounded like the art commission was okay with to put into the RFP. And then we offered to have staff review the art when it comes in. If the art commission feels like 16 feet is too small for this space, we're happy to hear what a, maybe different height is, or if the subcommittee is thinking there should be no height limit. I haven't heard that from them yet. So we could go back and talk to Kimberly about that height, if that's an issue, and we can provide language to Aaron and the committee to look at for the RFP. I don't know if it's helpful for the art commission for us to argue about building code in this meeting necessarily.
I'm not arguing. I want clear definition. I want a description that they can take to the artist and say, all right, the building, this piece of art, it doesn't matter what it's made out of, but you have to attach it only 3 times, and the attachment needs to be this particular material and color. Like, that's definitive descriptions that they can say in the RFP.
Right.
Because what's going to happen is if they come back with somebody that's like, all right, they've come excited with this art project, they have this piece and everyone loves it. You guys love it personally, even though maybe you can't approve it historically. And it's like, all right, the code says we can't put this one in. And that artist has just been giving a stipend, and they're like, you know what? I don't want to change my art to be half the size. It doesn't work. They walk away. That process starts all over again. The artists want to do, like, we're paying for an artist to do a thing that they want to do. If I'm maybe speaking out of turn here, but I think that what we would love is a really clear description of what the exact things you're looking for, that we can tell the artist that they have to do, not just,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Daniel. What I've heard from Kimberly and Jake is that there's going to be some attachment, some sort of like how it's adhered or how it's attached to these towers is part of the review. And so what we're asking, or I think what Daniel's getting at, is if we know that now, then let's be clear about what that is. Type, material, when, where, how it's attached. Does it have to be removable? Okay, then we can put that in the document. We may never remove it, but yeah, like Daniel said, maybe one day we decide we're going to take this down and put it somewhere else. Not likely, but it could happen. And so if that is known, then we need to include that. If it's very fluffy and it's like, well, how you attach it's important, but we're not going to tell you until we have the art, then that's really difficult for us down the road when we, like Daniel said, we might get a piece that's isn't possible to match what the criteria might be.
I respect, the whole concerns about the historic nature of the building, and whether it's interior, exterior, I don't mind them weighing in on this. However, we have 3 of us from the commission who are artists, art professionals, architect, and we will be considering, no doubt, the scale of the work, how it impacts the space around in the atrium, how it impacts, the different views. That's all part of what we're considering. The thing that kind of distresses me is the subjectivity that's being talked about in terms of the scale and the material. With the historic people, we may, decide that something is very appropriate in terms of the scale, whether it's 16 or 15 or 14 or whatever, and that, we would be sensitive to the way that it would have to be attached to the towers. But then would they come along and say, oh, well, we disagree with you. We think it's too big, or we don't like that material. Um, do they have, you know, do they override what we, decide on because of some very broad subjective thing about what they feel is appropriate?
For this, during the historic design review process, part of the application will have how each aspect of it meets the criteria. And so there's an opportunity to say, this is why this fits here. And, in the same way when you hear people, when they're talking about artwork and they say, well, this fits here because of this. And there's usually a clear rationale why, then the Historic Landmarks Commission, they're interpreting that based on the information, the justification that's given by the applicant, and then they're evaluating that over best practice.
But my question is, who, like, what if, the committee or who, the SPAC with whomever else is on our decision committee feels strongly that meets the criteria that we feel it should, and the Historic Landmarks Commission doesn't. Do they have power to veto it?
They have power to deny the application if they feel like it doesn't meet the criterion, yes. But that's why I think it's important that if we could put something in the RFP, like a lighter material that will have the need for less, drilling into the wall to hold it up, for example. And then having Kimberly or Jake around to review the submissions, they'll give you their instant feedback. Like, yeah, that's really light. And look, they only put 10 holes, but these other ones have 40 holes. Like, that's maybe.
Yeah, but that's not how it works. I mean, sorry, like you can put up one giant bolt into this wall and put up another concrete block. Like you could, so like a light material is not going to reduce the number of holes. In fact, you'd probably have more on a piece of, if you're going to put a piece of like fabric or like maybe it's a chain mail thing that's hanging up on this thing, you're going to put 50 holes that are small versus like you can actually put in like, so this conversation, so you said 4 holes. Is 4 holes better than 20 holes? Like, how do you know that? What is the what is the nature of making that delineation? Like a light material is not going to necessarily mean less holes. It doesn't work. Like you can't make that logical jump.
Maybe there can be general language that says that the historic nature of the building requires certain review in terms of how it affects the structure of and material of the building. I mean, something, I don't know, that's maybe too broad, but some broad language so that the artist is like, oh, they're gonna tell me what I can and can't do on this, and I need to think about it. And an artist will think about it if they know that it's a historic structure and they know that, I would imagine they would, some artists would understand they can't, chip away at the concrete, and so I think something broad without saying how many holes or things like that. I think it can be worded so that it's understood.
Yeah, but I think we need to know as a baseline, will art be allowed to be attached to the towers? Like what we did similar, I mean, I know the art in the library wasn't part of this purview or anything like that, obviously, but it was attached to the concrete wall that's inside the space. And so
Good example.
they used bolts. So they drilled into the wall and they were able to attach to the bolts. And I think technically it's removable. So they could go in there and remove it if they wanted to. But you don't, when you're looking at the art and the space, you don't see the holes or the bolts, you see the art. And so like if we're gonna say art can be attached to the wall, then I think we need to be very clear about what that means. Or if we're flat out saying you need to find some other way to present the art on the space, whether it's from the ceiling or what have you. That's the part that
magic floating anchors.
Right. Well, like you said, Daniel, I mean,
We didn't say that it couldn't be attached.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is allow you to utilize the flexibility that's inherent in the fact that we have the general guidelines, because one thing about historic properties is a lot of them, unless it's something that's like a whole development like Levittown, where everything is the same, that's the character, is that they are unique. And so there's some flexibility inherent in there, because if it has a unique character, we don't want to limit unnecessarily, adaptation for new use or adaptation for, rehabilitation for a property. Like what good would a building be if you could put an access ramp to make it usable? It would just be a museum piece. So we have things designed specifically to allow and shape what alterations end up being, but it's also there to help protect the overall historic character.
Is it fair to kind of to what Susan has asked and what you're referencing, Jake, was so section 23065, the general guidelines, would it be reasonable to ask them, the artist, like to put this code section into the RFP and have them answer these questions and how it addresses each of these items? And then like the art comes in with a narrative of how it does that. That would be like the most sort of like the problem is like they don't know what the art exactly is going to be when they submit, so they develop that over time. But that would be like, so we're saying this is what you're required to do as this artwork. And the question really becomes where they think about this piece of art differently than the historic resource. So, because like I think to Susan's observation is like we do have there's a lot of knowledge and art professionals and lots of different opinions about like what is good and bad relative to the historic piece. But what you're telling me, or what I'm hearing you say, is that if you can answer these questions in a thoughtful and clear way, that the historic resource officer or the historic resource board will look at those and, assuming they agree with them, will allow that to be installed the way that they describe it.
I don't think there's anything wrong at all if you want to cite those guidelines, especially if when artists do things on a commission, they have whatever the parameters are and they try to do it. If they line up with that and say, I can do something that I feel is what I want to do as an artist, and it fits those, then they will continue and want to do that. They'll submit something. So
Where is that code that you're referring to, Daniel?
I can try to share it if it's in the development code. I'm not sure. I'll send a request to share, and I could share my screen here. I'm not sure who's in control of the current screen. Let me know, and that's okay.
You should be able to go now.
Cool. Thanks. All right. So So this is the City of Salem's Unified Development Code, and then it's under the Historic Preservation chapter. And it's this section that Jake had been referencing, the general guidelines for historic contributing resources. And so this 20.
Yeah. You're not sharing it, Daniel.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. Didn't hit the share button. Yeah, section 23.065, 23.065. So this is the one that we had been referring to. So it was this one, and then there was the other one, 23.060, which is just the one before it. Anyway, this is a 10.9 point kind of description of providing modifications to the historic contributing resources. I had actually taken a screenshot because I was going to try to send it in the chat, but I think if there's, yeah, you can go through it. I can send you all kind of where this is and just you can read through it yourself. I think we'd have to describe if there's legs to this idea, you'd have to really describe how this applies to the art, because it would be a little confusing in that, I mean, it would give them a guideline to how they need to think about the existing building, right? It would say like, don't mess with the distinctive styles, features, and craftsmanship of the project, and you have to restore or reconstruct things if you have them there, if you mess them up. Minimize changes to the historic resource. Like it's very mushy language from a like this is what you have to do standpoint, which allows them a lot of fluidity way to interpret it how they would like to. And I think your question still, Susan, remains of like how, does the Historic Review Board agree or disagree with this kind of interpretation is true?
Actually, I think the section 230070 down below the general guidelines for non-contributing, where it says the size and scale is consistent and harmonious with the building and structure in the district generally. I mean,
it's
those
this one here. It has to be a historic contributing resource because this building is contributing to
does it have a similar thing about scale and size?
It doesn't. It just has this. Okay. This one I think would be, unless, am I correct about that, Jake? Is there another one that?
Right, depending on like the parts that are actually because in the National Register nomination, they talk about the atrium as a character defining feature that you'd want to use for contributing resources. If it were, say you wanted to put some, say you want to put the statuary in a less focal location, then you could use a non-contributing buildings and structures because you didn't have that proximity, because then they're looking at overall character. So say you were applying that to a residential historic district and you had, two properties and then one in between those two was made, like 10 years ago. You wouldn't set the same design guidelines for a resource that it wasn't carrying its own history. It's just you don't want to distract from the rest of the district. And so
sorry, I think this would be very confusing for an artist to look at. I don't see how it directly relates to any kind of art that might be.
I think
you could maybe put, I'm sorry, Aaron, is there any way to put links in? I mean, I know there are links in there. Maybe you could say for further information about various historic guidelines that may or may not contribute to a review, click on here and see section 230.065 and click here. I mean, I don't think it needs to be spelled out other than the other things that we were talking about that were more specific. just to, about the, how it would be, how it would affect the architecture. I don't know, I don't remember exactly how we worded it, but, yeah, I think this would be very confusing.
I think part of the problem is that they're trying to apply a development code that is specific to making an addition to the building, something that is a structural addition or repairing something. And that's not what this is. This is the Salem Public Arts Commission trying to send out RFQs to artists to create a piece of art that will be installed in the atrium. And that I think that for them to understand the importance of maybe how certain things are attached and the kinds of materials that would be acceptable, scale, and in large part just based on how it would be attached, but also the space that it's in, those things make sense to me. But beyond that, I don't really understand how the actual material that the art is made out of has any relevance to historic reviewing it. I mean, again, there. We're talking about two very different things, and this code doesn't apply to art. It applies to adding structural elements or making repairs, that type of thing. And I think that's where the confusion is. I mean, trust me, trying to even respond to this with the items that have happened at the city is a little challenging in itself, but to try to apply that to artwork that hasn't even been created seems even like I don't even know how you do that, I guess. And especially if they're trying to send out an RFQ. So maybe the better thing to do would just be kind of to determine the extent of the purview that historic has as it relates to it. And that's kind of why I asked, is one location better than another? But I mean, honestly, I think both locations that have been identified seem really perfect. That's a large community space. You'd be able to see it from almost everywhere. And so all of that seems really appropriate. And based on the fact that the funds being used are tied to the actual seismic work that's happening also seems appropriate. But I think trying to provide information to artists who are going to create something, I don't know how you could apply a lot of this stuff. I think that's the issue. So maybe it's really kind of defining what really applies as it relates to the art.
Again, I think we can provide specific considerations to put in the RFP that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting. We want to see how it's going to be attached. We would recommend a lighter material, but as you said, Daniel, maybe something heavy can be attached with not very many bolts. Like, how big are they? I don't know. We're not structural engineers or whatever you need to be to determine that, but we could provide some information about what we would be looking for, how it's attached, what the scale is, how that scale is appropriate for the atrium, and then maybe some suggestions on materials. There don't have to be limiting factors. I think that would make a lot more sense to folks than trying to point them to whatever code section we would write this material, information under for the application.
However, if the historic, the commission, your commission uses this criteria to justify, saying that you don't want it to be, and you point it out and you say, oh, well, see, we have it written here, then it does become important that we know that ahead of time. So, because other than that, you're going to be entirely subjective without referring to some criteria that's indicated. And there were certain things that Daniel was pointing out that could, I see it's related to new additions or new construction, but some of they are similar to the things that you've been talking about. The height, width, proportion, size, and scale is consistent with those in similar historic contributing buildings in the district. You know, there are I could see where the commission, the historic commission could say, see, it's, you know, we've stated that, so we're going to use that to say this is not compatible. So it's good to know that these things exist there. I mean, we could, you know,
What
we
I
don't want to go into litigation and say,
yeah.
well, this is only, you know, applies to, you
Well,
know,
what
new
I thought about when I
construction.
saw
But
this was like, oh, the library is a perfect example of it's in the historic resource. It's in the contributing resource as the as a campus. They put a piece of art in the library recently. Historically, like additions and alterations are a representation of time that has passed and should be recognized as historically relevant. And therefore, that is the way we've addressed
Yeah.
art in this campus, and therefore we can do a similar thing in this building. Like, but you might think differently. So like, you can just go. What I'm realizing here is like we're at a juxtaposition of conservative, like very conservation focused historic preservationism, and on the other side we have art, like free thinking. We want to make sure they could do anything they want, and this is like literally we're on opposite ends of a spectrum and trying to find like where we're going to line up and get to the solution. Art doesn't want any constraints, preservation doesn't want any changes.
Well,
What are we going to do?
with the rehabilitation, there is the language has changes designed in there. That's what.
No, I understand. I'm thinking philosophically. I
But
apologize. I'm thinking out loud a little bit about the dilemma we're in right now.
with
the reality is that Aaron needs to get this done.
Yes.
So what are we going to do?
Sounds like just to add three
Yeah.
questions.
If we,
How does this be attached?
if we had had more time, ideally the process would have been to go to the HLC and get their input on this. And they could have basically blessed some standards to put in the RFP. That's what we did before with the sculptures downtown. As the art commission came and presented what the project was, they gave their feedback, and there was some kind of agreement like these are the things we'd be looking at. This is how we would interpret these criteria. You know, go forth and use these. And then it was very easy to go through the review, but now there's not time to do that if the RFP needs to go out, you know, immediately. So as staff, we're just giving you our best guess to try to help get there.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, I mean, this is on me for not getting this in front of HLC sooner. But if it, I mean, I'm willing to pump the brakes and halt the process of the RFQ if we can get more defined guidance from the Historic Landmark Commission to put into this RFQ. I think that's going to go a long ways. I mean, like Susan said, we don't want to go down a path and then be like, oh, that's not going to work and start over, versus which puts us behind schedule, versus maybe we just say, hey, let's meet with the HLC, discuss the considerations and how they might view this to get that important feedback and incorporated into the RFQ. It'll take longer in the short term, but it could probably save us a lot of time in the long run. So I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how often they meet. If we can get on their next calendar, but
so the next regular meeting will be February 19th, which isn't that hard now.
Yes, and you could be on the agenda.
And then there'd be time to be added to the agenda.
Third Thursday, yes.
So
Yeah.
Could you guys provide the maybe example that you proposed for the other project that you referenced, just so we kind of have in our minds what those criteria are that you I guess outlined for the project you referenced? I think you said downtown.
Yeah, we can ask Kimberly for that. Jake wasn't here then.
That would be useful, I think, to just understand what those look like in practice.
Yeah, I mean, we could go to HLC and they could say, under no circumstances do we want any art on the towers. Like,
Yeah,
we don't care, we don't care how
that's
it's
the
taxed.
risk. Yeah.
We don't care how it's taxed. We don't care what it looks like. We're, and I'll be honest, when we met with them about Peace Plaza, we were
The
kind of,
atrium.
we were in the
Yeah, the
same
Peace Plaza.
same
Yeah.
situation. The Peace Plaza design. We heard from the public. We want it open. We want it friendly. We want it inviting. We want more green space. And then we went to HLC and they said, we want it rigid. We want it brutalistic. We want it keep it how it is. And so like Daniel was saying, we were on two ends of the spectrum. And so we had to we kind of like I think we got there, but it was, we got to, both parties had to compromise. And so I hope that HLC doesn't say no art there. I hope we can say, yeah, we would allow it if, XYZ. But yeah, all the more reason, maybe we say, let's hold off and we go to the meeting on the 19th and we present what we're thinking. I think it'd be really important to have SPAC members there. I know that your process, I mean, we have a committee of 3, but ultimately there's the full SPAC group that would need to make sure that whatever is determined or decided, that there's buy-in from that group as well. So just a lot of moving parts.
How great is the risk if we go with the guidelines that have been expressed here by staff and we incorporate that in the RFQ? How great is the risk that the commission is going to really reject any of our recommendations? Because it is going to slow down the process. There is the risk that they may overthink it and say, oh, you can't do anything. Or, I guess we should know that ahead of time, though, if they do say we can't have anything. But do you think, does staff think that that could be the case? Yeah, Chris Darcy wanted to say something.
It might just be helpful, and I appreciate all the conversation. It reminds me personally of all the discussion that occurred before the Cremains Memorial at the State Hospital actually was finally approved by the Landmarks Commission. It was a very long and complicated process. It might be good to actually take the RFQ as drafted, incorporate some of the changes that we discussed this morning, bring that as something for discussion at the February 19th Landmarks Commission meeting, and see where we can find some common ground. Our working group on SPAC, we've discussed, we understand the importance of the building. We discussed having something that would be of appropriate size should a sculpture be selected for that platform area. I'd never heard before this morning that weddings take place in that space, so that was interesting to hear. But it seems like maybe we could get closer to some common ground before we come in to a public meeting with the Landmarks Commission, and then see what happens there.
And so, are you saying then we could follow up with kind of the items Jake was talking about today in writing,
Yes.
in a way that it would appear in the RFQ
Yes.
potentially for you to review, and then you would hold off on issuing it and have that material to discuss in front of the HLC?
I think that would save time in the long run.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that would be great. And then I think, Kimberly and Jake would be the one providing that written information to you. So they would be the one also, guiding the conversation at HLC and can provide their, reasonings for why they've come up with that and how they think that fits within the, criteria of the zoning code to help guide that discussion at HLC. So I can't guarantee they always do what staff says, but most of the time they do.
Yeah, I don't want to speak, it's not in my role to speak for them, and I don't want to disappoint you if they disagree. I can't see a situation in which I'm going to not recommend that it's okay to have some sort of art in there. That would be against my recommendation because I don't see that it's hurting anything if done appropriately.
Yeah, and that's where Kimberly's at as well. I mean, I think maybe she told you that, Aaron, and I talked to her before this meeting. So they're neither of them are saying no art there in either location. So that would not be staff recommendation to HLC. But again,
But
can't guarantee what they.
what I don't want to do is give you confidence that I'm going to recommend something and then they're going to accept it because they have their discretion to say, I disagree entirely, and I don't want to put you in a position where, you know, you needed me to bring it home for you. It just didn't work that way.
Okay, so it sounds like, to wrap this up a little bit more, Kimberly and Jacob will provide a written detail on the criteria for this that the HLC that you can consider to bring to HLC. SPAC has their next meeting on February 11th, and then you can discuss those topics at that point, and then meet with HLC on the 19th. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes, and I think it's also important to remember that we are issuing an RFQ. We're looking at artist qualifications. So it is actually going to be only the selected people to prepare a proposal that are going to have to deal with some of these structural details.
Mm-hmm.
And there could be a mandatory, a bid conference to cover all this. I'm sure everybody understands. But I would like to see the art process continue because I realize that the timeline, is getting shorter.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Okay, well, we'll wait to hear back on the specific written material that I can incorporate into the RFQ. And then I'll add that once it's to me. Then we can share that with SPAC and HLC ahead of both meetings, so everyone has time to review it, and hopefully even provide comments so we can keep the process moving ahead of the HLC meeting, so we potentially get some feedback before then, in an effort to try to find potentially some compromise if it's necessary, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound right?
Yeah, do you want us to supply any of the documents that we put together with the criteria for choosing those locations? Or
Yes.
to present to the HLC?
Yeah, I think it would be
HLC, yeah.
added value to HLC so that they understand the process. And
do you have those documents?
I don't.
We can get them. We can get you our notes from the meetings we've had in the building.
Right. Okay.
All right.
I can
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Thank you for
Appreciate
pulling it
your
together.
Discussion.
appreciate
I
your
learned a
all's time.
lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay.
I like a good invigorating discussion, so thanks for your time.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, let me go ahead and stop.
Chris, are you gonna hang out for a minute so I can talk to you about the labels? Chris? Okay.